Under the light of the moon, Medellin led his team to the outskirts of Annapolis. They had loaded a truck with 10 tons of gasoline. These were secondhand goods they'd purchased from a logistics company. They didn't have time to check over the products before they put them into use. The cluster of buildings in the distance resembled an ordinary residential neighborhood with a garden of flowers and trees. It was scenic and pleasant to the eye, an ideal location for rehabilitation. The Grand Masters on patrol were disguised in inconspicuous security guard uniforms. Just step on the accelerator and drive. Destroying the Leviathan Unit's hospital will cause more damage than the headquarters. Turn the hospital into a sea of fire and raze it to the ground. Medellin's team felt no fear at the risk of being caught up in the explosion. The driver started the car with no emotion on his face. He stepped on the accelerator and sped towards the entrance. An explosion lit up the night sky, and a scorching shockwave swept the area. Medellin's team had jumped out of the truck at the last second and laid flat on the ground to avoid the explosion. Their physical recovery was fast, but they couldn't withstand high temperatures. The buildings went up in flames, burning through the broken glass and entering every room. A Leviathan Unit member condensed a protective barrier of inner energy, broke through the smoke and fire, and engaged with Medellin's team. A chaotic battle within the sea of flames had begun. News of the attack on the Leviathan Unit's hidden hospital was a rude awakening to the main headquarters. A few black cars sped towards the hospital in the suburbs. "What's the situation?" Stephen asked. The military advisor, Salim, turned on his laptop, reviewing the data that had been transmitted over. Most of the patients were being treated beneath the lobby in a secure underground location. After the explosion, they're being evacuated through a hidden passage. Stephen inspected the 3D transparent image on the screen. The buildings above ground were the tip of the iceberg. As a precaution against sudden attacks, the underground medical area had been built with reinforced concrete as a fallout shelter. It could withstand an explosion from an oil truck or even a missile. The driver had been caught on camera, and Stephen recognized him. He was a member of that strange group from Warhawk who had undergone genetic modification. "Brent Robinson's method of revenge sure is creative. I should have dealt with him half a year ago." If there was one thing Stephen learned from this, it was that showing mercy to his enemies was the same as stabbing himself in the back. Even the weakest of enemies he'd spared in the past always came back to haunt him in unexpected ways. Salim pointed at the burning buildings up ahead. The explosion was caused by gasoline. The culprits jumped out of the truck after it was ignited and waited for an opportunity to follow up. Stephen wasn't worried about the financial losses. He was concerned about his students and the other patients. He had to get rid of Brent's people. In the open space outside the hospital, both sides were engaged in a fierce fight. Medellin's team fought recklessly, aiming for the Leviathan Unit members' vitals while leaving themselves wide open. Any injuries they'd sustained healed seconds later. When they reached the outer area of flames, Stephen leaped onto the battlefield with his sword in hand. Medellin smiled when he saw him. "Look who it is. You're an added bonus. You're not going to run away like you did last time, are you?" Stephen's expression darkened. Anger welled up inside him, and it was more intense than the sea of fire around him. "You think you can do whatever you want just because you heal faster than normal people? I'll show you what true martial arts is." Stephen used his aura from his sword to separate Medellin from his team and seal off the area around them. He wanted to take him down himself. When Medellin was struck by Stephen's sword, not only was he not fazed, but his steps didn't falter. After genetic modification, every muscle and bone in his body had undergone a transformation. His body was like a sponge soaked with water, repelling any external force. Stephen didn't hold back. The inner energy within his sword materialized into a white dragon and coiled around Medellin. He tried to break free, but the manifestation tightened its grip and dug into his skin. A brown liquid flowed from his wounds. His skin stitched itself back together, and his body began to heal. Stephen's sword turned into a barrier of light that encased Medellin inside. It was the first time in his life after being genetically modified that he felt a sense of danger. There was no way out. "There's a limit to your regeneration," Stephen said. It's nothing more than a biochemical technology that catalyzes the internal cell division of your body. If you're ground into flesh, nothing can reform your original body." Before Magellan could reply, the barrier of light compressed and turned him into a rain of blood and flesh. The battle with Magellan's teammates ended quickly thanks to the outstanding wisdom and experience of the Leviathan unit's military advisor. The warehouse at the hospital stored various substances that were rarely used. They surprisingly came in handy now. Salim asked one of his subordinates to transfer several large cans of liquid nitrogen from the warehouse and sprayed Magellan's team. The gas had a temperature of -200 degrees Celsius, and when it came in contact with their bodies, it formed a thick layer of frost over their skin and solidified the liquid inside them. Noor and Jace's wind shattered them into ice cubes of flesh. They lost their vitality and emitted a foul smell. Magellan and his team had been eliminated. "They can't regenerate," Stephen said. "There's a limit to what their bodies are capable of. Bring back some samples to analyze. Our questions will be answered once the biochemistry professors from the Backwater Security Company are in our custody." The aftermath would have been handled by the rescue personnel. The explosion had damaged the hospital beyond normal repairs. It would have to be completely renovated before it was up and running again. The Leviathan unit members who were injured from the explosion and the patients were transferred to the main headquarters, which consisted of a medical ward that had been built for emergency use. Stephen's heart clenched at the sight of the familiar faces lying on the hospital beds. His students smiled in his direction when he entered the room, but he could tell that it was forced. He was filled with a myriad of emotions. He had reviewed their medical records. Their injuries were severe, and it'd be difficult for them to return to their peak condition. Salim came over and spoke in a low voice. "The most important thing is that they're alive. There's still hope. The Leviathan unit is researching rare medicines that might be effective." Now that they'd wiped out Brent's team, he wouldn't be making another move for the time being. The next issue to consider were those prisoners on the run. Stephen didn't know much about the Seven Stars prison. Even the guards at the prison were oblivious to how strong they really were. Because of the Array's influence, they were no different from ordinary martial artists while they were detained. The only thing they knew about the prisoners was that before they were imprisoned, their cultivation varied from the Grandmaster to the Divine Grandmaster realm. An accurate method of assessing their strength didn't exist, which meant that they lacked the advantage when it came to intel on their enemies. "Jace, have you found any leads on the prisoners?" Stephen asked. "I don't want the incident with Clarence to happen again. It'll be better if we strike first." Jace had spent many sleepless nights investigating the prisoners, so he had a general idea of what they'd been up to. A few of the strongest prisoners had formed a team and went around robbing homes to amass wealth. The Blue River Mountains were located near the southwest border of the U.S. The dangerous terrain made the mountain range a natural boundary between civilization and the southwest border. Not long ago, the wealthy towns at the foot of the mountain were robbed by a team of martial artists. The banks, auction houses, entertainment facilities, and even the local wealthy and powerful families weren't spared. The blurry photos taken by the security cameras couldn't confirm the culprits' identities, but there was enough evidence to prove that the culprits were the prisoners. The complicated terrain was to their advantage. After taking action, they could retreat and escape past the border if they wanted to. It wasn't easy to catch all of them in one fell swoop. Stephen fell into deep thought after listening to Jace's report. They were strong enough to evade capture since their escape and made the Leviathan unit experience heavy setbacks. Before we chase after them, let's first take care of the injuries of our own people. Jace nodded in agreement. During the battle at the Seven Stars prison, several of his teammates had been seriously injured or killed. The Leviathan unit's forces were at risk of complete annihilation. Tegan, Hyde, Trey, and Yule were widely respected for their talents in martial arts, but the battle had left their lives hanging by a thread. Jace had spent a lot of time with Trey and Yule ever since Stephen had taken them on as their students. They were usually lively and outgoing. It was a sharp contrast to their quiet and prone forms lying on the hospital beds. "I've asked the Leviathan unit to bring all the rare medicinal herbs they have in the warehouse to the main headquarters," Jace said. "Good work." Stephen thought back to when he was poisoned by Devil Hall. After recovering, he'd paid Lionel a visit in Annapolis and learned a lot about ancient medicine. I can't guarantee I'll be able to treat all of your injuries. It's not as simple as an internal or external wound. There are remnants of your opponent's techniques inside you. Yule had a smile on his face despite the obvious pain he was in. Life and death are determined by fate. It's more than enough that you're offering to try. In the desolate wilderness on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., the Cassidy family staff tossed the bodies of Anton, Jakari, and Claus into the hole they'd dug before burying them. It hadn't been easy for the three of them to escape from prison. Unfortunately, they'd picked the wrong target. After cleaning up, the staff wiped the sweat from their foreheads and started grumbling. That young man from the Empyrean Circle killed these criminals in less than a minute. It was a bad idea for the Cassidy family to provoke Stephen. That's none of our business. That's for them to worry about. But didn't you see Harry and Rebecca ridiculing him constantly ever since he married into the family? I'm worried he'll implicate innocent people like us. Watch what you say when we get back. The walls have ears. I know, you don't have to remind me. The sun was setting, and the wind was gradually picking up. When they were about to head back to the Cassidy family's residence, two elderly men appeared in their path. The pressure they admitted terrified the staff. The two elderly men, Enrique and Jerry, were fugitives who had escaped from the Seven Stars prison. They were passing by when they came across a group of people burying 3 familiar corpses. Those 3 endured so many years in prison and survived. Who would have thought that they'd die so soon after regaining their freedom? Jerry snapped his fingers. The sound of breaking bones filled the air, followed by the staff's screams. Without much effort, the two of them found out everything that had happened during DeAndre's celebration. This was an important piece of information, and they should tell their boss about it. Not all the fugitives on the run were ransacking homes near the Blue River Mountains. Enrique and Jerry, for example, had found an even bigger backer, and that was the leader of Vindictus, Odin. After becoming his subordinates, they'd been living a life of luxury with the support of foreign capital. It had taken Odin more than a year to get out of the Seven Stars prison. At this time, he was on the deck of a luxurious cruise ship, sailing aimlessly across international waters. 2 women were applying sunscreen on his back. The multitude of scars on his skin recorded the harsh life he'd endured since his capture. Enrique and Jerry informed him of what they'd learned in Washington, D.C. Boss, the military stationed in the north are in a stalemate with the enemy's army. If we escalate the conflict, a war will break out, and the U.S. will suffer heavy casualties. The remaining members of Vindictus are scattered across the country, Odin replied. They won't be able to gather at the northern border in such a short amount of time. Go to the Blue River Mountains in the south and look for the other prisoners. Their plans had failed repeatedly because of Stephen. They had to rebuild their organization with a fresh batch of like-minded helpers. The prisoners near the mountain are eccentric and cruel, Enrique said. They're not easy to talk to. Money makes the world go round. They've been detained in the prison for a long time. They should at least hear you out. We'll decide whether to recruit them or not after listening to their requests. In the evening, an herbal scent enveloped the Leviathan unit's headquarters. Stephen's treatment had gone smoothly, and color had returned to the patients' faces. But there were some things that couldn't be healed or recovered after they were lost. Trey's severed arm couldn't be regenerated out of thin air. The 10 years that Kane had lost from his lifespan couldn't be replenished, and Huey and Emery couldn't be revived. Stephen was exhausted as he collapsed onto the chair nearby. Jace had asked the Leviathan unit to prepare a guest room closer to the medical ward for Stephen to recuperate after the treatment. He transferred a large amount of his own aura and inner energy into the patients. It was equivalent to fighting for days on end. It was a self-sacrificing form of treatment, and only someone like Stephen could use it occasionally. Their condition is improving, Salim observed. How long do you think it'll take them to make a full recovery? Stephen was optimistic. His students and the Cepheus subunit members were tenacious, and their will to live was strong. Once their injuries were stabilized, making a full recovery wouldn't be a problem. As for the other patients, he would assess their condition at a later time. It's already a good sign that Hyde and Yule woke up on their own before I began treatment. They'll be fully recovered in 2 weeks. But Trey's wound is difficult to treat. It'll be hard for him to return to his post after recovering. He'll need some time to adjust. Trey had a different opinion. He was eager to return to the battlefield. One hand is more than enough to hold a weapon. I can get back to work right now. Stephen shook his head disapprovingly. You need to relax, he scolded. Stay put for another 2 weeks like the rest of them. I'll review the ancient medical texts to see if grafting is possible, but it'll take some time. Their injuries had been severe, and everyone thought it was a lost cause. But Stephen had done the impossible, and hope was on the horizon. The heavy atmosphere at the Leviathan Unit's headquarters lessened just a bit. A few days later, the team who'd gone to Warhawk to meet the biochemistry professors from the Backwater Security Company returned with good news. The Leviathan Unit secretly brought the 2 professors, Amber and Mitty, into the interrogation room. They belonged to the senior management and were independently responsible for certain projects of the company's subdepartment, the Genetic Research Institute. Towards the end of Amber and Mitty's vacation, the team from the Leviathan Unit had sneaked onto their cruise ship without anyone noticing. They killed the security personnel and cut off the connection between the ship and the outside world. They adjusted the coordinates and escorted the professors onto the helicopter. It was a successful mission without any mishaps. The Backwater Security Company, which had been notified later on, headed to the location where the cruise ship had gone missing to look for missing civilians. But their search was destined to be a needle in a haystack at the bottom of the sea. Stephen would be personally interrogating the professors. Tell us about the project and the basis of your genetic modification technology. Staying quiet won't help your case. You're only making things harder for yourself. Amber and Mitty didn't move or speak. They were as still as statues. Stephen transferred a small amount of his inner energy into them. He picked up a cup of boiling water and poured it over their hands. His inner energy protected their skin and blood vessels, but the pain was real and unforgettable. The 2 of them were scientists with no foundation in martial arts. They couldn't withstand this degree of torture. They gave in and answered his questions. The basis of our technology relies on drugs to cause mutations in genes. Internal and external integration of the desired genome template is facilitated by a special potion. The genome template is a model simulated by a supercomputer. After copying it onto the test subjects, further testing is required through an actual combat. Brent Robinson's team was the first batch of samples. Stephen hadn't known this was possible with contemporary technology. An ordinary martial artist could become a troublesome enemy if they were genetically modified by the Backwater Security Company. The research laboratory on Mirage Island had recently developed a drug that could modify the genome. If a martial artist took the drug, their strength would gradually increase up to 10 times within 3 months. However, the results of the Backwater Security Company were clearly the superior breakthrough. They discovered a way to enhance both strength and recovery, which was a combination of offense and defense. Are there any side effects? Stephen asked. For example, is there a risk of death if the genetic modification is successful? Amber and Mitty shook their heads. We haven't done enough testing to have a comprehensive list of side effects. It was recently developed and we haven't perfected it yet. If you're lying, you know the consequences. The lie detector will analyze the credibility of your words. After obtaining crucial information, Stephen left the interrogation room. The technical staff attempted to crack the information on their phones, including the passwords to their emails and network. Using their IP address, they installed a virus on the computers of the Research Institute at the Backwater Security Company. It only took 2 hours to obtain the necessary documents. Mr. Adams, I've contacted the research department affiliated with the Leviathan Unit, Chase said. Their researchers are here to analyze the documents and verify the scientist's claim. It won't take them long to come to a conclusion. He and Stephen went to another room while the experts got to work. Their forte was martial arts, and they were laymen when it came to biochemical technology. There was nothing they could contribute, so they sat back and waited patiently for the results. In the evening, one of the researchers went to find Stephen to report his findings. There's a limit to the number of divisions cells can undergo in a lifetime. The regenerative abilities gained from genetic modification are facilitated by an acceleration of the cell's metabolism. This greatly reduces one's lifespan, and their organs will begin to deteriorate rapidly. This was a significant flaw in Warhawk's biochemical technology. From the researcher's report, Stephen concluded that if he faced another genetically modified opponent from the Backwater Security Company, he could defeat them by extending the duration of the battle or destroying their bodies beyond the limits of regeneration. The samples from Warhawk's team that were recovered from the hospital have lost all its regenerative effects, the researcher continued. It'll take us slightly longer to complete our research. It's fine, Stephen said. There's no pressure. I'll leave it to you. 2 top scientists had gone missing from their vacation, and Warhawk did everything they could to search for them. According to the real-time images captured by the satellite, they discovered an unfamiliar plane leaving the area where the cruise ship was last spotted and heading towards the U.S. The timing aligned with the scientists' disappearance, but there were no other detailed leads. Warhawk gathered a delegation team and sent them to the U.S. to inquire about Amber and Mitty's whereabouts. Stephen couldn't be bothered with them. Greet them politely, then tell them you don't know anything, and tell them to get lost. Yes, sir, the Leviathan unit member replied. The Backwater Security Company was located on an island in the southern region of Warhawk. Their headquarters was the most conspicuous building there. The extravagant renovations were comparable to a 5-star hotel. Every guest who entered or exited were rich or part of a royal family. Today, the major shareholders of the company were holding an emergency meeting to discuss Amber and Mitty's disappearances. Sending a delegation team to the U.S. and directly asking about their whereabouts was a humiliation. Everyone knows what the Sovereign's like. He's persistent and shrewd. It's highly likely that this is a scheme he devised to take his revenge on us. Everyone at the table was in a bind. The Genetic Research Institute's operations couldn't proceed without Amber and Mitty. In addition, Medellin and his team were wiped out, and the data of their live combat experience hadn't been transmitted back. Unexpected situations were cropping up one after another. I suggest directly sending our troops to the United States' northern border. Whoever has a better idea, speak up. If there are no objections, then let's go ahead with it. Are you aware of the astronomical costs of going to war? The multi-country allied army at the northern border is only there to pressure the U.S. Their goal isn't to start a war. As they quarreled, the argument became a mess of insults and potential solutions. They had been planning to use the newly developed biochemical technology to suppress the U.S. and get rid of the Sovereign. But this incident had thrown a wrench in their plans. The U.S. was a major world power, and they couldn't risk confronting them directly. In the end, everyone's gazes fell on Brent. Mr. Brent, if I remember correctly, we're in this predicament because of you. Medellin's team was killed under your command. I don't care how you do it, but you'll have to take responsibility. Why don't you make up for your mistake by finding Dr. Amber and Dr. Mitty? The blame had shifted to Brent, and he was at a loss for how to defend himself. Ever since his authority was taken away, the armed forces under his command were limited. You're not planning on sacrificing me, are you? He demanded. Of course not. This is your mess, and you'll take care of it on your own. But we won't sit back and do nothing. We'll support you with our funds and manpower. At this point, Brent was out of excuses. He could only take his leave and went back to come up with a plan with his subordinates. As time went by, the Leviathan unit's interrogation specialists took turns and squeezed all the valuable information they could from Amber and Mitty. Instead of executing them, using them as bait would be more useful in luring the enemy. The researchers worked day and night and finally developed a potion following the recipe outlined in the documents. The researcher carefully handed the test tube to Stephen. The liquid was as blue as the ocean depths. Mr. Adams, will you be using the potion on your subordinates? We haven't found a way to perfect it. The issues I explained earlier still stand. No, the side effects are too risky. Stephen handed Trey's medical records to the researcher. However, I would like your opinion on his condition. The researcher flipped through the document. The cells required for the healing process are limited, and regenerating an arm will risk the failure of the other organs. It would be better to consider grafting instead. All right, I'll bring Trey with me to search for suitable materials. With that settled, it was time to head to the Blue River Mountains in the southwest to investigate. Before Stephen left, he stopped by his house to see his family. Kim and Valeria waited for him at the entrance when they heard he'd be coming back. They stood there and peered down the street, waiting for him to show up. When Stephen finally appeared, they pounced on him and clung to him like koalas, refusing to let go. The mother and daughter pair started complaining. Stephen, your bodyguards are really adamant about following us everywhere whenever we leave the house. We can't even take a stroll in peace. Daddy, it's so boring without you at home. How long are you staying this time? Although they were complaining, Stephen knew that Kim and Valeria supported him unconditionally. Kim had prepared Stephen's favorite dishes when she heard that he'd be coming home. The family of 3 enjoyed a hearty meal at the dining table. Skyreach Corporation's development had been going smoothly. With Kim at the helm, there was no business that couldn't be done. What's happening with the Cassidy family? Stephen asked. I heard Harry and Rebecca have been at each other's throats since Grandpa's birthday. Who knows? Maybe they'll make up and start scheming together again. The Cassidy family didn't think too highly of Harry and Rebecca anymore, but after Kim left the family, they only had them to rely on, so they couldn't treat them too badly. The family harshly reprimanded Harry and Rebecca, but the actual punishment they received was minor. In their eyes, there's only money and power, Kim said. They've been trying to do business using my name during their negotiations, but it's not a big deal. They haven't been bothering us since the party. Like Kim, Stephen didn't think Harry and Rebecca were a threat. As long as they stayed away, it wasn't necessary for him to step in. Warhawk has sent a delegation team to our country. They haven't left yet, but I'm guessing it's a formality before they threaten to send troops. Our neighboring countries haven't withdrawn their army at the northern border either. A full-scale war might break out at any time. At times like these, the government should take control of the mines, hospitals, military logistics, and other related industries related to war supplies. The private capital can't be responsible for them alone. How do you plan on implementing that? Kim asked. These industries were profitable, and transferring them to the government's hands would conflict with many wealthy families and their companies' interests. It was a good strategy to prepare for war, but it would cause a lot of backlash. Stephen was planning to ask the government to courteously enforce the new regulations. Making preparations in advance is unavoidable. We'll post an announcement and ask the local government for their cooperation. For the time being, nothing much will change for the private capital involved. They'll continue to receive regular dividends, but all management rights and operations will be handed over to the government. There will be consequences for anyone who refuses. Tension was high at the border, and the threat of war was near. Stephen had to resort to more forceful methods. As an example, Kim's Skyreach Corporation would take the lead and hand over their management to the government. The estimated annual losses were above $100 billion, but the losses would be even more significant if the country fell to ruin. Kim knew what she had to do. In the next few days, 2 shocking announcements were made one after another. Kim personally held a press conference in Annapolis. She took a seat on stage and spoke with the reporters. She expressed that her company would cooperate and give management rights to the government. Trade and commerce can't continue until the country's at peace. Complying with the new policy will benefit everyone in the long run. I hope everyone can give the government your cooperation. Stephen was watching the press conference below from the second floor. He was impressed with her speech. But shouting slogans wouldn't be enough to convince the wealthy families to give up their businesses temporarily. He needed to give them a push. The Leviathan unit's military advisor, Salim, was the strategist of their organization. Stephen had personally acknowledged his skills, and he needed his help. Salim was confident that it'd be a piece of cake. I'll ask my subordinates to conduct a thorough review of their business's accounts. I doubt the numbers will add up. They'll be sure to comply after we have a discussion with them. Okay, I'm counting on you. Pay close attention to the wealthy families near the border. They think that because they're far away from Annapolis, they can escape our notice. They also might threaten to collude with the foreign countries. Don't play into their hands. Yes, sir. Kim's press conference was held at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it was broadcast live to the entire country after the official announcement was posted. At 12 o'clock in the afternoon, the joint operations of the multiple government departments began. They went to every wealthy family's house to sign the contract. Kim looked out the car window at the crowded streets as they passed through traffic. Stephen knew what she was thinking from her expression. It wasn't easy for you to develop the company into what it is today. Let nature take its course. When this is over, more opportunities will come your way. However, Kim didn't treat her business like a martial artist's lifelong pursuit of the martial path. To leave her company in another person's hands to develop was an important stepping stone. She was actually worrying about Stephen, but she didn't want her concerns to get in his way when he had so much on his plate. Where are we going next? I should meet with Warhawk's delegation team at least once and give them a taste of their own medicine. Want to come with me? Kim agreed, and they headed in the opposite direction towards a luxury hotel managed by the government's military department. It wasn't open to the public, and it was one of the safest places for leisure and entertainment in the country. The hotel was reserved for high-ranking authorities and foreign guests. Stephen asked for an update from the military department's secretary when they arrived. Is the delegation team from Warhawk still making the same claims? Yes. They're insisting that Dr. Amber and Dr. Mitty are in the U.S. In half an hour, arrange for them to visit Annapolis's Biochemical Technology Research Institute. I'll personally accompany them. Yes, sir. The military department's secretary was surprised by Stephen's request, but he didn't question him. Ever since the general in charge of Annapolis's defense, Gustav, was killed, work had been piling up on the other military officers. Everyone had split up to inspect the defenses at the border in person to prepare for war. The administrative matters at the military department had been left to the secretary to handle. Stephen and Kim leisurely walked into the conference room, accompanied by the staff. Both parties were currently arguing with each other. They were so heated that their faces were flushed. When Stephen entered the room, there was a short silence followed by respectful greetings. It's an honor to finally meet you, Mr. Sovereign. We are representatives from Warhawk, and we came with friendly intentions. We hope that the friendship between our two countries will last forever. Even if both sides hated each other to the core, they still had to keep up appearances. Stephen nodded and took a seat. He pulled out the chair next to him for Kim. I heard you're here to search for 2 biochemistry professors who've gone missing. Isn't it inappropriate to claim they're in our country when they haven't been sighted anywhere within our borders? They're adults, and they're free to go wherever they want. The delegation team was annoyed, but they kept their anger in check. They were speaking with the Sovereign, after all. Mr. Sovereign, we have evidence to prove that a plane from your country took them away. As they spoke, they took out a picture that the satellite had taken and passed it to Stephen, but he waved it away. According to our country's laws, only the materials provided by the National Security Agency are considered evidence. I understand that they're scientists researching a groundbreaking biochemical technology. Our country's also developing rapidly in that field as well. Would you like to take a look? The delegation team could never pass up on the opportunity to take a peek at their biggest enemy's secrets. Everyone in the conference room set off for the Biochemical Technology Research Institute in a grandiose manner. Stephen wasn't planning to show them the core of their discoveries. He just wanted them to see enough to know that the U.S. had gotten their hands on crucial information from Amber and Maddie. 10 minutes later, they arrived at the entrance of a building similar to an exhibition hall. The most conspicuous construction in the bright and spacious hall was the 3-dimensional genome pieced together by plastic models. This was a perfect replication of the theoretical genome model that Warhawk had generated using a supercomputer, and the same reagent that had been used on Medellín's team. Stephen tapped the bulletproof glass display case and explained with a smile. Every creature has a unique genome, But at the end of the day, it's a combination of just one of the many possibilities. One genome in particular is most suited for combat. Confirming the model is only the first step. Using catalytic drugs to change the genome in the body is the most important breakthrough. Stephen had heard this explanation from Amber and Mitty, and he was repeating it to the delegation team. Of course, the representatives from Warhawk had seen and heard about this before. The ideal genome for combat that Warhawk had generated was exactly the same as the model inside the glass case right in front of them. Such a coincidence did not exist. Stephen went on to explain that regenerative properties of the familiar biochemical technology that the delegation team had heard many times before. They'd heard enough to understand that Stephen had brought them here to indirectly tell them that Amber and Mitty were in their custody, and Warhawk's secret research had been exposed. And from his confident manner of speech, it was likely that the U.S. had already replicated the potion required for successful genetic modification. The delegation team forced a smile on their faces. I'm envious of the United States' Advanced Research and Development Team. As there are no leads to the missing persons, we don't plan to waste any more time here. Okay, send my regards to your higher-ups, Stephen said lightly. The delegation team boarded a private plane and returned to Warhawk empty-handed. Even though they knew the U.S. had taken Amber and Mitty, there was nothing they could do but leave. Brent was less than pleased when he received the news. If Medellín's team hadn't failed, he wouldn't be in this situation. You were there for a while. Didn't you take the opportunity to investigate? Annapolis is an important place. Amber and Mitty have been detained somewhere in the city. The delegation team shook their heads. They booked us an exclusive hotel, and then it was non-stop negotiations. Their goal was to test our patience and make us leave on our own. The sovereign implied that the U.S. had caught up with our research. Negotiations had fallen through, and Brent didn't have much confidence in the team searching for the scientists outside the U.S. There was nothing more to learn from the delegation team, so he dismissed them with a wave of his hand. Even after an extensive discussion with his trusted aides, they couldn't come up with any good ideas to rescue the scientists. Although he had the financial support of the tycoons and Warhawk and received the authority to mobilize troops, he couldn't directly send a team into the U.S. to search the heavily guarded city of Annapolis. The only way was to target the people around Stephen and conduct an exchange of hostages, but that was nearly impossible. Medellín's team had been wiped out, and even if they had genetically modified the army, they might not be able to stir up any waves in the U.S. now that their research had been exposed. Brent was furious when he glanced at his silent subordinate standing next to him. Why are you so quiet? Hurry up and come up with a plan. Right before he was about to flip out, the butler reported that there was a guest here to visit. It was the leader of Vindictus. Brent stood up abruptly, as if his savior had arrived, and he went out to greet the guest. They relocated to the luxurious living room and got straight to the point. I had to go through more than a year of hell to escape from prison, Odin said. I need Stephen's blood to wash away my hatred. Brent nodded in understanding and explained the situation at the United States' northern border. Warhawk's higher-ups have unanimously decided to take action, but we don't have a good plan. The multi-country allied army has hundreds of thousands of troops, but each of them has ulterior motives, and none of them want the tension to escalate into a conflict. Odin explained his own plans. I've sent 2 of my subordinates to the Blue River Mountains to search for the fugitives. Their animosity for the sovereign is obvious. It won't take them too long to release the beasts on the mountain. The Blue River Mountains were home to many ferocious beasts. Even Grand Masters would hesitate to venture into the depths of the mountains. In ancient times, some of the strongest martial artists tamed beasts and used them as mounts. Most of them were from the Blue River Mountains. With the rapid development of civilization, the once common appearance of beasts on the streets became far in between until they disappeared altogether. Martial artists gave up on taming them to prevent the spread of fear among people. These days, the beasts on the Blue River Mountains rarely came into contact with humans, but their strength couldn't be underestimated. Brent could already imagine the scene of those ferocious beasts running wild on the streets of the U.S., ravaging cities and slaughtering its people. With the chaos in the southwestern region, the Sovereign will head down there himself and resolve the crisis. This will be an opportunity for us to kidnap the people around him. Vindictus's combat forces had been significantly weakened since their last confrontation with the Sovereign, so Odin was there to borrow Warhawk's troops. Brent readily agreed. I'll dispatch a team of 30 to lend you a hand. They've been genetically modified. They're no match for the Sovereign, but they'll provide backup when you negotiate with fugitives on the mountain. Thank you for your support, Mr. Brent. The two of them once again joined hands for their personal ambitions. A few days after the industrial integration policy was issued, all sorts of protests were on the rise. Stephen had expected this. The government handled the issue on the surface, while the palace operated in the dark. With the two of them working together, they quickly took care of the opposition. A helicopter was waiting in the villa's yard. Stephen said his goodbyes to Kim and Valeria. My trip to the mountains won't take too long. I'll be back before you know it. There won't be too much work to do at the company for the time being, so take this chance and relax. Kim and Valeria blinked back tears. They prayed for Stephen's safe return. Wes and Aston watched from a distance, hoping that Stephen would notice them and bring them along to the Blue River Mountains. Daddy, can you bring back a pet from the mountains for me? Stephen patted his daughter's head with a smile. Of course I can. I'll bring back a whole bunch of cute animals. We can build a small zoo in our backyard. Valeria beamed with anticipation. It's a promise. You can't go back on your word. The helicopter took off and disappeared into the horizon. Trey could barely contain himself as he sat beside Stephen. Mr. Adams, what materials are we looking for? Stephen gave him a cryptic smile. The ancient beast, Killen. The higher the quality of materials, the better your recovery will be. Trey's eyes widened at his wild suggestion. But doesn't that beast only exist in legends? Can we really find traces of it in the mountains? My subordinates found a book titled Illustrations of 100 Beasts in one of the towns at the foot of the Blue River Mountains. More than 100 beasts are recorded. Here, see for yourself. Stephen handed Trey a tablet. The towns at the foot of the mountain range made a living via trade caravans. Venturing into the mountains was a dangerous career, but when there was money to be made, there would always be fearless and greedy martial artists willing to take on the job. Precious ores, medicinal herbs, and the fur, bones, and cores of beasts were found throughout the mountain. They were priceless and could be exchanged for a large sum of money. Over time, this trade became the basis of the town's prosperity. After Stephen left, some people began to rethink their life choices. DeAndre's disastrous birthday celebration had put Harry and Rebecca in an awkward position in the Cassidy family. The successor and inheritor of the family's wealth was up in the air. To appease Stephen, DeAndre was willing to make any sacrifices. This included handing the entire family over to Kim for her to manage. Her husband was the Sovereign, and that was the only way to preserve their family's legacy. In the afternoon, Harry and Rebecca met up in a private clubhouse on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. After a period of fruitless competition, they were finally sitting calmly next to each other at the same table. They ate in silence as their predicament loomed over their heads. The delicacies and the aged wine on the table were tasteless and bland. They finished their meals and put down their forks at the same time. Harry spoke first. Can't we make peace? Nothing good will come out of competing with each other. If we keep this up, both of us are going to lose everything. Rebecca agreed. Ever since the industrial integration policy was issued, their respective businesses had fewer projects. If this continued, it'd be difficult for them to maintain their lavish lifestyles. I think this is Stephen's plan. With the government taking control of the businesses, the market will be empty. At that time, he'll make Kim take back her management rights for her company and steal most of the market's shares for themselves. If this were before, they wouldn't have hesitated to devise a scheme to regain control of the industry. But with their current standing in the family, they couldn't risk digging a deeper hole for themselves. Harry was skilled at underhanded tactics. If he were forced to run a business properly, he would never be able to make a name for himself. Grandpa tossed us to the sidelines. Don't expect any help from him. We need to come up with a way to save ourselves. Do you have any ideas? There's no way we're getting out of this, Rebecca said. Money is tight, and we don't have anyone on our side. Why don't we just go home and beg Grandpa for help? Or we could beg Kim instead. They would be humiliated if they went to Kim to ask for her help. but it'd be worth it as long as she was providing them with some sort of charity. Harry was reluctant to lose face. Rebecca shrugged. If you don't want to go, then forget it. I'll go alone. Beggars can't be choosers. I'm flexible and I can adapt to any situation. The most important thing right now is to accumulate our finances. Harry hesitated, but he eventually gave in. They discussed and finally reached a compromise. That night, Rebecca pretended to be enthusiastic and sent an invitation to Kim, hoping to have dinner with her. After Kim ended the call, Wes and Aston expressed their doubts. The two of them were familiar with how manipulative the Cassidy family could be. Miss Kim, those two cousins of yours are like annoying pests that linger around you without an ounce of shame, Aston warned. I'm certain they have ulterior motives for inviting you to dinner. Wes, who was standing off to the side, nodded in agreement. They know Mr. Adams is away, so they're planning to take advantage of his absence to stir up trouble. Kim acknowledged their concerns. I understand where you're coming from. Don't worry, if they make any ridiculous requests, I'll reject them. As the sovereign's wife, a grand entourage accompanied her whenever she went into public places. Kim arrived at the five-star hotel in a luxurious bulletproof car worth tens of millions of dollars. Before she went inside, the Leviathan unit members in the car behind her filed into the hotel and occupied the entire lobby at their fastest speed. Wes and Aston maintained a short distance and quietly followed Kim inside. Their suspicious gazes fell on Harry and Rebecca the moment they entered the VIP room. The chef displayed the magnificent cooking skills he'd accumulated throughout his lifetime and prepared a table of extravagant dishes with no flaws to be found. Rebecca gave Kim a warm welcome. It's so nice to see you. If you weren't busy with work, I would have asked you to dinner a while ago. She was very attentive and poured Kim a cup of tea. Harry, who was sitting next to his sister, played his part by plastering a smile on his face. Their pleasantries went in one ear and out the other. Kim was only interested in tasting the delicacies. It's getting harder and harder to do business, Rebecca complained. This is all because of the new policy. Our living standards are already much higher than most people, Kim replied, taking a sip of her tea. Money isn't all there is to life. You should find a hobby if you have nothing better to do. She was giving them life advice, but they didn't see it that way. They thought she was bragging about her money. Rebecca swallowed her annoyance and got down to business. It hasn't been going well for us since Grandpa's birthday. And with the new policy in effect, we're about to become unemployed. Speaking of which, maritime transportation in the Eastern Coastal Port isn't included in the policy. It should be fine if we get involved in that industry to earn a living, right? If the logistic channels on land were being controlled by the authorities, the flow of goods would be obstructed, which would in turn increase the demand for maritime shipping services. Harry and Rebecca didn't need to ask him for permission to do business at the Eastern Port, but her affirmative answer would give them the freedom to do whatever they wanted. Kim didn't have a reason to talk them out of it. If you want to do business at the Eastern Port, I won't stop you. Good luck. Rebecca was excited. Okay, wait for our good news. We'll tell you all about it when we come back, Harry added eagerly. Kim wasn't used to them being so docile and well-behaved. She felt like she was having a meal with strangers rather than her own cousins. Wes and Aston didn't know what Harry and Rebecca were planning. They relayed their discussion with Kim to Stephen later that day. Mr. Adams, are you going to let Harry and Rebecca do business at the Eastern Port? Aston asked. Stephen thought about it, but like Kim, he didn't have reason to refuse either. It's not that bad to have them go away. At least they'll be out of Kim's hair for a while. We're just worried that they'll conspire with the foreign countries and tamper with the business at the coastline, Wes said. Tension's already high at the northern border. Wes and Aston were experienced, so their concerns couldn't be taken lightly. Stephen could also tell that nothing much had been going on lately, so the two of them were getting a little bored with nothing to do all day. He decided to give them a mission. Monitor them for now. If they end up betraying the country, we'll decide what to do with them then. Soon, the helicopter landed at the military-exclusive airport on the outskirts of town. Stephen and his group were refreshed by the crisp and clean mountain air. Mr. Adams, should we head up the mountain directly or go to the local police station and ask for the latest information? Chase asked. Stephen would have preferred to head up the mountain, but he had to take the bigger picture into consideration. No one knows when or where the fugitives will strike next. Their random attacks have been causing widespread panic among the residents. Let's head to the police station first." The higher-ups of the local police station were so scared that they couldn't speak properly when the Sovereign appeared in their office without a warning. "Welcome to town, Mr. Adams. Please let us know if there's anything you'd like us to do." Stephen took a seat on the leather couch in the director's office. He was in full work mode as he pointed at the files piled up like a mountain in the cabinet. "Give me all the files related to the robberies happening recently." The Sovereign meant business, so the director hastily sorted through the pile and placed the relevant files on the table in front of him. The robberies were getting out of control, and the director was afraid that Stephen would fire him for not managing the situation properly. But his concerns were unfounded because Stephen didn't bother him and focused on flipping through the files. The more the fugitives attacked, the more clues they left behind. He estimated more than 20 criminals based on the descriptions of the scene of the crime. It seemed like the prisoners on the run really were gathering on the mountain. They primarily carried out their heists in 3 towns at the foot of the mountain, indicating that this was their approximate range of activity. Hiding isn't a long-term solution. They have to head into town at some point to get food and water. Strengthen the defenses in these 3 locations and set up traps. The conventional methods that Stephen had suggested to catch the fugitives had already been implemented in town. The fugitives were martial artists, and traps were child's play to them. "We've tried that," the director said. "We haven't made any progress, because there's a big gap between the police and the fugitives." Stephen tossed the file onto the table. The Blue River Mountains being a natural boundary was an obstacle in itself, and mediocre management was complicating the situation. "I don't think you understand the reasoning behind my suggestions. I just said that the fugitives are in need of daily supplies, so they need to establish a stable transport channel. Have you investigated the wealthy families? They could be colluding with the fugitives." Stephen's criticisms made the director's heart pound. If the Sovereign was dissatisfied, he could have his head severed with one strike of his sword within seconds. In a moment of desperation, the director brought up the Brenner family. "We may have a lead. The Brenner family runs the largest construction material company in town. They frequently enter the forest to cut down trees. Recently, several unfamiliar martial artists have been lingering around the head of the family, Ralph Brenner." The director's words were a combination of truth and conjecture, but he successfully diverted the Sovereign's attention away from his incompetence. Stephen decided to begin the investigation with the Brenner family. After he instructed the higher-ups at the police station to conceal his identity, he left with his group. They found an abandoned house near the city gate to use as their temporary base. They disguised themselves as locals, donning their attire and imitating their manner of speech to gather information. The Brenner family's business wasn't included in the industrial integration policy, so they continued to live a life of luxury. At this time, the head of the family, Ralph, was hosting a banquet in the yard. The guests were watching a dance performance on stage. Frederick Kearns, ranked 8th on the list of dangerous prisoners, was sitting next to Ralph. He'd mastered the art of hiding weapons, and his nickname was 1,000 Hands. Frederick was admiring a jar of red fruits. "These jujube fruits have been sealed for 50 years. They must be rejuvenating." "I've prepared the highest quality for you," Ralph replied. "I'll ask my people to send the goods to the forest soon." Frederick grabbed a bottle of wine and downed the contents. "Make sure to include meat and poultry in the delivery. We didn't have much of that in prison, and we can't get enough of it." He was responsible for leading a small team to the towns at the foot of the mountain to collect daily supplies and information for his fellow fugitives. It was an easy task once he found the Brenner family to be their backer. "We've been having trouble with a few business competitors lately," Ralph said. "If it's not too inconvenient, could I trouble you to take care of them for us?" Frederick was satisfied with their partnership, so he wouldn't refuse such a small request. "It won't take too much effort to deal with an upper-class family. I'll handle it." Ralph had predicted his answer. The construction material industry was a profitable business in these parts. After getting rid of their competitors, the Brenner family would become one of the richest families within 5 years. Stephen and Jace had put on masks and were observing the crowd eating and drinking in the yard on a rooftop outside the mansion. They confirmed Frederick's identity based on his appearance. "It's predictable, but the wealthy families aren't as clean as they seem. They're conspiring with the fugitives. It was suspicious that the Brenner family wasn't robbed when they're one of the richest families in town. Frederick's subordinates were sitting next to him, and their auras weren't particularly strong. None of them were ranked on the list of dangerous prisoners, nor had they made the country's hit list. The U.S. officials were responsible for issuing the hit list and making any necessary adjustments. The names listed were typically criminals who'd committed heinous crimes, and the list was modified regularly based on their status. Their names would be removed if they were imprisoned or killed. After the riots at the Seven Stars prison, most of the names at the top of the hit list belonged to the prisoners who'd escaped, and they aligned with the list of dangerous prisoners on the loose. Both lists excluded Enzo, Gideon, and Bennett because anyone who went after them would likely not succeed. Jace was getting impatient. It'll be easy to get rid of them. Why don't we attack them directly? Sure, let's go, Stephen said. The banquet was almost over. Ralph was an ordinary person with no martial arts training. He was already drunk from all the wine. Frederick and his subordinates were the only ones still conscious. Frederick sensed something amiss and darted into the garden behind him. His subordinates weren't as vigilant. Before they knew what was going on, a bone-deep incision had been made on their necks. Frederick, who'd been hiding among the flowers, threw out his hidden weapons. He didn't know where the assailant was, so he covered a wide range. His weapons glinted under the moonlight, and they were as clear as day to Stephen and Jace. He really does have a talent for hidden weapons, Stephen commented. He slammed his fist onto the table beside him. The plates and utensils flew into the air and clashed with Frederick's weapons. Stephen and Jace drew their swords at the same time and ran in the direction where Frederick was hiding. The aura of their swords resonated with one another and destroyed half of the garden with unstoppable momentum, leaving Frederick with nowhere to hide. Frederick gritted his teeth in annoyance. Where did you two come from? If it's a fight you want, I'll give you one. Stephen noticed that he didn't have a decent weapon on hand. That made things easier. After escaping from prison, the only ending for you fugitives is a life of hiding. Coming into town is a death sentence. But Frederick wouldn't surrender without a fight. With a wave of his arms, a barrage of weapons shot out from his sleeves. When one of the weapons hit their swords, it exploded into a cloud of smoke. Stephen and Jace slowed down and covered their faces to block the pungent smell. It was poison. Jace put his sword away and flexed his hand. He gathered his inner energy and unleashed a gust of wind that dispersed the thick fog, revealing Frederick's location once again. Jace circulated his inner energy to form a layer covering every inch of his skin. The poison's toxicity wasn't as troublesome as he'd expected. It disintegrated quickly. Stephen held his sword behind his back and lifted his hand. Martial artists like you are only capable of techniques that involve hidden weapons. I'll use the same method against you. The leaves and petals on the ground rose up and shot towards Frederick at an unimaginable speed. He'd been given his nickname 1,000 Hands for a reason, but unfortunately, the number of weapons he had on him was limited. He couldn't dodge or block the sheer number of leaves and petals covering the sky. After a few rounds, Frederick was covered in small cuts, and his clothes were tattered. Jace dashed behind him and slammed his palm against his back. Frederick lost his haughty attitude. His opponent was suppressing his meridians using 30% of his strength. If Frederick forcefully circulated his inner energy, or if his opponent put a little more force into it, he would explode and die a gruesome death. Frederick gave up, and Jace escorted him to their temporary base. Stephen stayed behind to intimidate the bold head of the family for colluding with the fugitives. Ralph woke up from his drunken stupor when he felt a sharp pain in his abdomen. He sat up with a start at the sight of the scene before him. The yard was a mess. It looked like a tornado had blown over. If it weren't for the fact that the rest of the building had been left untouched, he wouldn't have recognized his own home. He glared at the man in the mask. Who are you? Do you know where this is? You're brave, but you're the type who doesn't have much courage when it counts. Stephen's words drew Ralph's attention to the bloody bodies around them. He frantically looked around for any signs of their family's backer, Frederick, but there was no trace of him. Ralph dropped to his knees faster than the time it would take to flip the page of a book. You colluded with fugitives from the Seven Stars prison, Stephen threatened. This is a crime punishable by death. Ralph didn't want his century-old family business to fall to ruin. Seeing that the man in a mask had no intention of hacking away at him with his sword, he immediately tried to convince him of his worth. I know the safest route to the mountains, and I also know the location of the cave where the supplies are stored. If you spare me, I'll hand over all of my family's assets." This was a crucial lead. Stephen grabbed Ralph's collar and dragged him into the mansion. The other family members and the mansion's staff were cowering in the corner. Stephen sat on the couch, keeping a steady flow of his aura in the air and suppressing everyone in the room. Ralph stumbled to the cabinet and pulled out a map of the Blue River Mountains from the drawer. He marked a location on the map. This was where his people cut down trees and mined in the caves. It was close to where the fugitives were hiding. The Pine Creek Pond is a lake that spans tens of miles. The fugitives built wooden houses in the perimeter. They store their items in multiple caves halfway up the mountain. Stephen confirmed the validity of Ralph's statement from the topography of the map. This was a suitable location to live in the wild. "Are there any wild beasts in the area?" "The Pine Creek Pond is surrounded by a publicly acknowledged hunting area," Ralph said. "Most of the large animals have been killed." "I see. Let me verify your information personally." Stephen made a call to the police station to confirm. He also brought the director up to speed and informed him of his plans. He'd be leaving Ralph by his side as a guide up the mountain. The rest of his family would be sent to prison to reflect on their actions. The director was both shocked and a little afraid of Stephen's efficiency. He'd ruined a powerful, wealthy family and obtained a lead in no time at all. In comparison, the director felt like he was just a bystander who was of no help. After that, the doors to the Brenner family's mansion were tightly shut, and the patrolling security guards were replaced by police officers. To the public, there was nothing unusual going on. "Ralph's claims were true then," Stephen said. "Are there any other families in town like them?" The director shook his head while shaking in his boots. This was yet another question from the sovereign that proved that his management ability was not up to par. Back at the abandoned house, Jace and Nor were also successful in interrogating Frederick. The information they got from him was similar to Ralph's, which proved that they weren't playing any tricks. Nor had destroyed Frederick's meridians, preventing him from practicing martial arts ever again. Aside from being physically stronger than most people, there was no risk of him escaping from a prison a second time. In the middle of the night, Jace, Nor, and Trey reconvened with Stephen under the light of the moon. "Let's head up the mountain. If we wait any longer, the fugitives will know something's up." Everyone was eager to get to the heart of their mission. Only Ralph, who was standing off to the side, was despondent with a defeated look on his face. Several bonfires were burning on the shore of Pine Creek Pond. The peaceful atmosphere was accompanied by the aroma of barbecued meat. "It's getting late. When's Frederick coming back?" "You know how he is. He's lazy. He can't pass up on the chance to have a good meal and a few drinks." "Why did we recruit a good-for-nothing like him? He's a disgrace." "Stop complaining. It wasn't easy for us to break out of prison. If we don't band together, the Sovereign and his people will catch up to us." The fugitives chatted as they enjoyed a dinner of barbecued meat, not noticing the danger that was fast approaching. The strongest martial artists in the group were considered the higher-ups, and they weren't staying at the shore. They hid in the forest nearby and cultivated diligently. They aimed to restore their martial arts to what it used to be before they were imprisoned. Their strength had declined after so many years in prison, and they had more important things to worry about than meat and wine. Stephen and his group trekked up the mountain, agile and quiet, like predators on the hunt for their prey. Ralph was familiar with the terrain at the foot of the mountain. He led everyone to an open space with a full view of the Pine Creek Pond. They looked over the lake and noticed bonfires burning in the distance. "The people you're looking for are by the shore," Ralph explained. "There are a few deep caves 1 mile to the southeast on the mountainside. That's where their daily supplies are stored." Stephen was satisfied with the intel. He patted Ralph's shoulder, and a gentle stream of inner energy flowed into his mind, knocking him unconscious. After half an hour of observation, Stephen didn't see any sign of the fugitives ranked at the top of the hit list. There were only the prisoners ranked 6th and 7th. The criminals who weren't listed were small fries who didn't matter. "Our main targets aren't there," Jay said. "If we attack now, wouldn't we be alerting the others?" "Who knows where they've gone? We're already on the mountain. We'll deal with them all eventually." With Stephen's command, his group split into 2 teams and headed towards the campfire from the left and right. Noor dipped his hands into the lake, infusing his inner energy into the water. Ripples spanned the surface and spread toward the shore. Translucent piranhas leapt out of the water one after another and bit the fugitives gathered around the bonfires. Before they could react, the piranhas' razor-sharp teeth tore open their arms and thighs. Noor's manifestation was a one-time use. The piranhas vanished in a flash of light after attacking their targets. The fugitives ranked 6th and 7th pulled out their weapons and cautiously scanned their surroundings. Was our location exposed? It can't be a coincidence. Frederick didn't come back. But it doesn't look like they know too much. They found us, but not the others. To them, this was a minor setback that wasn't worth reporting to the higher-ups of their group. Bothering them while they were cultivating would land them in an even bigger predicament. The water rippled, and a massive wave rose above the surface. The water droplets condensed into icicles that targeted the fugitives on the shore. Aside from the fugitives ranked 6th and 7th, their unlucky underlings were turned into hornets' nests and fell lifelessly to the ground. The fugitives ranked 6th and 7th leapt into the air and deflected the icicles, shattering the projectiles into shards of ice. They scattered over the sandy shore. While Trey was distracting them with the ice, Stephen and the rest launched a collective attack, aiming to take them down in the shortest amount of time. The ray of light pierced the fugitives' defenses without losing any momentum. They were forced to leap to the side to dodge the fatal blow. As they landed on the ground, they observed the group of masked men in black, but they couldn't figure out who they were. The fugitives ranked 7th condensed his inner energy into a red ball of light. It was as bright as the sun, illuminating the shore and dispersing the darkness of the night. The wave looming over the lake lost its effectiveness. The high temperature of the ball of red light evaporated the icicles before they could get close. "Surrender and go back to prison," Stephen said. "If you keep resisting, it'll only make things harder for you, like those companions of yours." A sense of fear welled up inside the fugitives. His threat was confirmation that Frederick and his team had been killed. Without taking their eyes off the masked group, they scanned the forest for an escape route. If they met up with the higher-ups, there was a chance for them to turn the tide. Unfortunately, Stephen's group was swift, decisive, and aggressive. They left the fugitives with no opportunity to run off. Noor shattered the boulders nearby, and Stephen hurled the shards of rock into the sand in front of the fugitives. A thick cloud of smoke enveloped the red ball of light inside. The resulting shockwave kept the fugitives rooted in place. Jace, who'd been hiding in the back, saw his opportunity to attack. His sword pierced through the two fugitives' knees at the same time. The fugitive ranked 7th refused to give up, but before he could unleash another technique, Jace severed his fingers with one swing of his sword. He used the last of his strength to burst the red ball of light from within. The explosion lit up the sky. Its radiance was more dazzling than fireworks. The higher-ups of the fugitives who were hiding in the forest noticed the commotion. They stopped what they were doing and observed the unusual activity on the shore. "Our team on the shore has been exposed. Should we go save them?" "No, they might already be dead. Not just anyone could have tracked down our location." "I don't think they're from the Leviathan unit, but they could be martial artists of a similar caliber. We can't act rashly." The prisoners gathered on the mountain had their own ulterior motives, and they were only working together to increase their chances of successful escape. There was no reason to risk their lives rescuing each other. They were too far away to distinguish who their enemy was anyway, so they made up their minds to venture deeper into the forest. Tonight's operation was a complete victory for Stephen's group. At the crack of dawn, they took the two fugitives ranked 6th and 7th to the local police station. Their lives were saved after a simple treatment, and they revealed crucial information with minor interrogation. News of the Brenner family's properties being confiscated spread across town. The other wealthy families started to keep a low profile. The director of the local police station prepared a luxurious office for Stephen, and at the same time handed him all of the authority. The director personally led a team to patrol the towns at the foot of the mountain. The atmosphere had taken a drastic turn for the better. It was nothing like the widespread panic before the Sovereign arrived. "I searched the forest around the lake with the Leviathan unit members, but the caves were empty," Jace reported. They were probably scared away by the commotion at the shore. This was within Stephen's expectations. We'll track them down when the time is right. For now, the hindrances are gone, so let's go into the forest and capture the beasts. Trey sat next to Stephen excitedly. He could return to the battlefield with 90% of his original strength if they found suitable materials to construct an artificial limb. Jace and Nord joined them at the table, and the four of them huddled around the map, searching for the best route to head back up the mountain. Odin's two subordinates, Enrique and Jerry, were one step too late. When they arrived at the lake, they found traces of an intense battle, but the fugitives had long disappeared. They heaved a sigh. We've traveled thousands of miles to get here, but we missed them. Do you think all of them were wiped out? I doubt it. I haven't heard of any Leviathan unit members in this area. Besides them, who else could deal with the fugitives while keeping a low profile? They were left with no choice but to report the current situation to Odin. At this time, Odin and Brent were in the country of Garan. This was one of the United States' neighboring countries near the southwestern border. They moved into a hotel at the center of one of its prosperous cities with a large group of their people. Enrique and Jerry's report was everything Brent needed to figure out the mastermind. We don't need concrete evidence to know that this is the Sovereign's handiwork. Should we lead a team across the border and hike up the mountain ourselves? Odin shot down his suggestion. That's not a good idea. There are beasts on that mountain. It's dangerous for civilians and martial artists alike. He didn't want to waste energy on meaningless traveling. He wasn't familiar with the Blue River Mountains, and he wasn't one to waltz into danger in unknown territory. That night, they invited the head of the city guards to their luxurious suite. The dining table was filled with delicacies. They had been prepared with ingredients that ordinary people couldn't begin to dream of. Brent and Odin were full of sincerity as the head of the guards stuffed his face with food. You don't have to be so polite. Our countries are old friends. I thought Warhawk would take the initiative to wage war against the U.S., but there hasn't been any news. Garan was located close to the U.S., and the head of the city guards couldn't wait to charge past the border and attack the cities, but his country needed to wait for someone else to take the lead. Brent chuckled. I'm leading this operation, but it's every man for himself. Warhawk's higher-ups each have their own goals. They don't want to waste resources to start a war. Although that was the case, Warhawk's hatred for the U.S. hadn't lessened. As the years passed, their grudge became stronger. If they could get rid of the Sovereign, the country would be left with no leader. That would be the best opportunity to ally with the United States' hostile countries and launch an all-out attack. The three of them toasted to each other's success and drank until their faces were flushed. The head of the city guards had been stationed at the border for many years, and he was familiar with the terrain. Boarding a helicopter wasn't the only option to reach the Blue River Mountains. There were hidden paths that led across the border that Brent and Odin could use as reference. Odin cut into his steak with a small knife. He wasn't in a hurry to confront the Sovereign and the Leviathan unit directly. He needed to make use of the beasts on the mountain first. Our first goal is to release the beasts and have them wreak havoc on the towns at the foot of the mountain. The Sovereign will definitely show up with his people to restore the peace. His forces will be scattered, and that's our best chance to ambush them. The head of the city guards agreed with Odin's plan. He volunteered to send his best hunters to assist in their operation. The beasts possessed little to no intelligence, and they were easily provoked. It wouldn't be that hard to have them set their sights on the town near the mountain. The plan was finalized with a brief discussion. After a round of drinks, Brent took out a sandalwood box and opened the lid. There were dozens of colorful diamonds inside. This is a small token of my appreciation as a tribute to our country's friendly relationship. The head of the city guards couldn't stop himself from smiling. The gears in his head were turning, trying to calculate how much these jewels were worth. You're much too polite. Let's meet again after we succeed. Stephen was one step faster. He didn't make too many preparations after choosing the route. He took Nor and Trey with him and trekked up the mountain once more. While they were away, the director of the police station was personally supervising the construction of defense towers and sentries at multiple locations at the foot of the mountain. According to the map, there might be traces of a fire kiln at the crater 100 miles away from here. I also need to catch some small animals. My little girl wants a pet. The Sovereign is a true definition of a family man, Noor teased. Trent nodded. I don't know anyone who's as devoted to his family as Mr. Adams. As they ventured deeper into the mountain, the atmosphere began to change. Stephen's group sensed the aura of wild beasts the second they stepped into their territory. There were silver wolves, unicorn rhinoceroses, three-eyed giant apes, multi-tailed foxes, and more. Stephen spotted them from the corner of his eye, and from time to time, the wild beasts would jump out of the forest and attack him. Unfortunately, they chose the wrong prey. Stephen's group took them down with a few slashes of their weapons. They're sensitive to the scent of humans, Noor said. They'll keep coming at us for the rest of our journey. Stephen was indifferent. It can't be helped. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. One of the major landmarks of the Blue River Mountains was a volcano located in deeper parts of the mountain range. Thick smoke billowed from the crater all year round, and the surrounding temperature was over 300 degrees Fahrenheit. The vegetation had long since withered away, and even the rocky terrain was scorched black. The strongest wild beasts chose dangerous environments as their nests. For example, the fire kiln. It could camouflage itself within the lava. Even though Stephen's group were skilled martial artists, they spent over 7 hours trekking up the difficult terrain to reach the volcano. A deep and earth-shattering roar came from the crater. They couldn't see the ferocious creature, but they could envision its terrifying appearance from the sound it made. They slowed down and tightened their grips on their weapons. When they reached the mouth of the volcano, they saw a massive beast swimming in the lava that was over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit like it was bathwater. Trey wiped the sweat from his forehead. The temperature's too high in there to do much else, but I can try to attract its attention. He threw a wave of his inner energy laced with ice into the volcano. The kiln emerged from the pool of lava in a pillar of flames. It stared up at the 3 tiny humans peering into the crater. It saw them as trespassers on its territory. The kiln shot out of the volcano and into the air, slashing at Stephen with its claws. He defended off the beast with his sword, and he was only able to leave a shallow mark on its scales. He didn't put all of his strength into it, but the kiln's defenses were astonishing. It'll be hard to break through its scales. Trey had an idea. Its internal organs can't be as indestructible as the exterior. When the heat and cold converge, it causes a strong reaction. It should be effective. Trey leaped into the sky and accumulated his inner energy, while Stephen and Noor assisted him on the ground. They targeted the gaps between the kiln's scales, but their attacks made it more violent and aggressive. It opened its mouth and spat out balls of fire. The explosion was more destructive than weapons of war. Stephen and Noor almost lost their balance. The kiln's strength exceeded everyone's imagination. When Stephen and Noor tried to attack at close range, 2 of the kiln's scales detached from its body and honed in on them. It was more accurate than a boomerang. Stephen and Noor deflected the scales, but they couldn't shatter them, and only managed to change their course. The kiln's fiery aura made it impossible for them to get close. Stephen spread his arms, enveloping the kiln in a golden cascade of light. It compressed and restricted the beast's movements. Noor didn't waste any time and struck the kiln's exposed underbelly. It let out a roar that shook the earth. Lava spewed from the crater of the volcano and seemed to have a life of its own. It swept towards Stephen and Noor with the kiln's control. Trey, who was in the air, had finished gathering his inner energy. He was shrouded in a veil of blue light. From afar, he resembled a crystal-clear water droplet. Trey didn't hesitate. He dove towards the kiln and drilled a hole through its underbelly. Everything had happened so fast that before Stephen could realize what Trey was planning and stop him, he'd already disappeared inside the kiln's body. He called out to Noor in alarm. It's about to start rampaging! It's too dangerous to stay here! The 2 of them sped back down the mountain just as the kiln plunged into the volcano and devoured mouthfuls of lava, trying to burn the invader in its stomach to death. The temperature around the crater rose to scorching heights. From a distance, Stephen looked at the cloud of smoke billowing from the mouth of the volcano, hoping that Trey would come out of this safely. If he'd known Trey would take such a big risk, he wouldn't have brought him here. Stephen was a bundle of nerves. Nor tried to reassure him. Trey will be fine. His aura is the opposite of the Killen's. His extreme cold will neutralize its extreme heat and kill it from the inside out. Stephen was still concerned. I hope you're right. The battle within the volcano was loud and destructive, but aside from the boiling temperatures outside, the mountain remained unchanged. It was fairly peaceful, only because the Killen and Trey's struggle didn't erupt on a large scale. Around half an hour later, the temperature dropped drastically as the Killen's roars faded. When Stephen and Nor returned, they found the Killen and Trey laying in the bottom of the crater. The volcano's lava and interior had been frozen over. Stephen and Nor leaped inside and carried Trey out. They laid him on the ground and inspected his injuries. His skin was horribly burned. Stephen didn't know if it was because of the high temperature or the gastric fluid, but it was a horrifying sight. Wandering the belly of a beast was like walking through the gates of hell. It was a miracle that Trey was alive. Nor felt Trey's wrist for a pulse. It's not fatal. He's lost consciousness, but his pulse is stable. He got away with superficial injuries. Let's use that drug they developed on Mirage Island. Stephen agreed without hesitation. He took out the vial and spilled the liquid over Trey's skin. Within a few minutes, his ghastly burns disappeared, and his skin returned to its smooth and pale, unblemished state. Stephen also transferred his inner energy into Trey's meridians to help him regain consciousness. Trey sat up with a cough. Am I still alive? That beast didn't run away, did it? He looked around, searching for the Killen, but he froze when he came face to face with Stephen's icy stare. It's dead. You need to wait for your body to fully recover before you transplant a new arm. Putting that aside, what were you thinking? Do you know how dangerous that was? Trey sat there and listened to the all-too-familiar lecture. If there was one thing Stephen and Jace had in common, it was their nagging about his reckless behavior. Stephen was still droning on and on about the stunt he pulled when the helicopter arrived receiving the coordinates. Trey saw his chance to escape. He took a small part of the Killen to forge his new arm, jumped into the helicopter, and set off for Annapolis. Stephen watched him leave with an exasperated sigh. Trey probably didn't hear a word he said. After the helicopter disappeared into the distance, Stephen dismantled the rest of the Killen's body with Nor and brought the parts back down the mountain to their temporary base. He stood in the middle of the yard, inspecting their spoils of war, looking very satisfied. Nor brought over a furnace packed to the brim with high-energy crystals. The Killen's core is filled with energy. Embedding it into your sword will enhance its abilities. Stephen sat down and spent the next hour carefully carving matching grooves onto the core and his sword. He tossed the rest of the materials into the furnace, and all that was left to do was to wait. Meanwhile, Enrique and Jerry were wandering the outskirts of the towns at the foot of the mountain. When they heard that the Sovereign was in the area, they were careful to stay out of his way. A few days later, Brent and Odin brought their people across the border and entered the mountain. After meeting up with Enrique and Jerry, the experienced hunters from Garan led their group up the mountain path to a canyon shrouded in fog. The hunters warned the group of the dangerous vegetation in the canyon. The poisonous shade grass grows in this canyon. Ingesting it will cause strange hallucinations and corrode your internal organs. The wild beasts in the area are resistant to the effects. They use the grass to guide them down the mountain. Brent was pale, and he was beginning to feel lightheaded. They were a distance away from the entrance to the canyon, but they were already affected by the fog. The mist surrounding the canyon was formed by the leaves of the shade grass. A small dose was enough to cause significant side effects. Brent's subordinates, who were martial artists, transferred their inner energy into him to alleviate the side effects. His head cleared in 10 minutes. What the hell is this place? The smell is even more disgusting than the restroom. That's precisely why so many of the beasts chose to make the canyon their home, the hunters explained. Normal humans would never be able to make it inside. The beasts ingest grass not to fill their stomachs or increase their strength, but to experience an illusion of indescribable joy. It's similar to the effect of catnip on cats. With their introduction, Brent finally had some understanding of the situation in the canyon. Next, it was time for his team to take action. They rushed into the canyon with a sack of fertilizer in their hands. The warm climate and fertilizer would promote the rapid growth of shade grass in a few days. The wild beasts would follow the trail of shade grass and descend the mountain in droves. The town's residents were oblivious to the danger brewing in the dark. They were enjoying the peace after weeks of widespread panic caused by the fugitives. Stephen was currently in his office at the police station, leisurely drinking coffee as he reviewed the confessions of the 3 fugitives they'd captured. There were no new leads to go on. Aside from meeting up to split the loot, the higher-ups of the fugitives didn't see their underlings that often. The 3 fugitives have served their uses, so Stephen arranged for the Leviathan unit to escort them to Annapolis. Noor pushed open the door and entered the room. He had good news to report. The lab created an artificial limb using the Killen as its primary material. Trey's operation was successful. He'll be fully recovered and discharged within a week. That's good to hear, Stephen mused. Everything worked out in the end. I've finished upgrading my weapon, too. When are we heading back up the mountain to find the rest of the fugitives? Nora asked. They'd only taken 5 of the criminals on the hit list into custody. The remaining half were still hiding in the dark, leading the other fugitives to stir up trouble. Not yet. We don't have any credible information to go on. Looking for a couple of people in a large mountain range is harder than searching for a needle in a haystack. We could lure them out of hiding. Everyone in Warhawk had been busy ever since Amber and Mitty disappeared. They could use the 2 scientists as bait, but Noor had his reservations. According to our intel, Warhawk isn't planning to invade the U.S. for the time being. I suspect they're working together with our enemies to sneak into our borders. If their genetically modified army, Vindictus, and the fugitives work together, it'll be difficult to deal with them. Luring them isn't the answer. Stephen considered it and agreed. If this were a direct confrontation with him alone, there was nothing to worry about. But their enemy was in hiding, and the civilians were out in the open. If the conflict intensified, the civilians would become the victims. What do you have in mind? The Leviathan unit's leader has finished repairing the array at the 7 Stars prison, Noor said. I suggest discussing this with him before making a decision. At noon, a transport aircraft landed at the international airport in town. The lead researcher, Dr. Dalton, was planning to lead his team up the mountain to take samples. After obtaining Warhawk's latest breakthrough, the Biochemical Technology Research Institute in Annapolis had become much busier. Combining the technology of 2 countries and reducing the adverse effects on one's lifespan was a huge scientific challenge. Dr. Dalton was here to collect gene models of the beasts on the mountain, hoping that after extensive research and trials, the final result could benefit martial artists. Stephen welcomed the team at the local police station. I've heard about Trey's operation. Thank you for your help. There's no need to be so polite, Mr. Adams. It's my duty. Everyone raised their wine glasses for a toast. Dr. Dalton was impressed with Warhawk's technological advancements. They were slightly better than the U.S. when it came to improving one's combat abilities. There's no pressure, Stephen said. The only way to truly improve one's cultivation is to progress steadily on the martial path. It has to be done step by step. Their genetic modification is an unorthodox method. Dr. Dalton agreed with Stephen's point of view, but he believed that his research could have varying uses that could be beneficial. After a few rounds of drinks, Dr. Dalton and his team wasted no time to head up the mountain. Stephen went to inspect the defense and sentry towers that were currently being constructed. Half of the indestructible reinforced concrete buildings were underground, and the other half were exposed. The infrared monitoring equipment on top of the defense tower was enough to lock on to any moving target. Large-caliber, close combat cannons fired more than 200 rounds per minute, and they had a similar homing feature. The only outcome for ordinary enemies would be death, but Stephen was still a little worried as he stood beside the high-voltage electric net. Mr. Adams, are there any improvements you'd like us to make? There's none. Our enemy is hiding in the forest. They can launch an attack and retreat back to the mountain afterward. They have the geographical advantage. In Stephen's opinion, only fools would charge headfirst towards the towers. It would be smarter to search for a blind spot at the edge of the battlefield instead. As the sun began to set and the sky darkened, Stephen had an ominous feeling as he looked over the shadowy mountain range. At this time, Dr. Dalton's team had rushed back empty-handed. "Mr. Adams, there's been a significant change on the mountain regarding the wild beasts. Their unusual activity indicates that something is about to happen. Can you be more specific?" "The beasts have a strong sense of territorial awareness. When we went up the mountain, there was no sign of them anywhere. It was like they disappeared. This can only mean that they're gathering in large groups elsewhere. They're united because they have a common target." Dr. Dalton's team had ventured into the deeper parts of the mountain with the Leviathan unit members, but they'd missed the canyon because it was shrouded in fog. The shade grass was growing rapidly from the fertilizer and the humid climate. More and more beasts were attracted to the canyon. Brent and Odin had ordered their people to ground the shade grass into powder and scatter them along the path that led down the mountain. It wouldn't be long until the beasts followed the trail and rushed into the towns. Not long after Dr. Dalton's team returned, the director of the police station walked over with a dejected look on his face. "I've asked my people to operate the reconnaissance aircraft for aerial filming, but there's no traces of the wild beasts. Dr. Dalton's speculation may be correct." The threat was rapidly approaching, but with no leads, Stephen could only give general instructions. He asked them to speed up the tower's construction and prepare to use firepower should the situation call for it. As night fell, the clouds covered the moonlight, enveloping the mountain in a veil of darkness. It was like a black hole waiting to devour trespassers. It was a point of no return for anyone who set foot on the mountain. A small group was sneaking around in the darkness. They were the rest of the fugitives hiding on the mountain. Shiloh Felder, who was ranked first on the hit list, was among the group. Ever since he lost some of his subordinates at Pine Creek Lake, he'd been wandering every corner of the forest with the rest of them. He didn't confront the Sovereign directly, nor did he contact the enemies from overseas. He hid in the dark and waited for the right time to take action. "Boss, we've been running around aimlessly for several days now. What's our next plan?" His subordinates were also escapees from the Seven Stars prison. They sounded respectful, but they were complaining inwardly. They weren't cowards. The Sovereign was right in front of them. What could be a better chance to take their revenge if not now? Shiloh gave them a knowing look. "I know what you're thinking. You have two options. Wait for an opportunity to fight to your heart's content, or leave the border and live a carefree life. If you're not worried about the Sovereign and the Leviathan unit's relentless pursuit, feel free to leave. I won't stop you, but those who choose to stay behind have to listen to my instructions. We'll strike after Brent and his people pave the way for us." Shiloh was patient. His grudge against the country had been brewing all the years he'd been detained in prison. Waiting a little longer meant nothing to him. His subordinates looked at each other, but no one had any intention of leaving. They had to work together to exact their revenge. If they worked independently, they would fail to stir up a storm. Shiloh and his group lit a bonfire in an open space in the forest to prepare dinner. While they were busy with their work, laughter drifted from the depths of the dark forest. It was faint at first, but it gradually became louder. Everyone pulled out their weapons and prepared for a fight. A man in a black robe emerged from the darkness with light footsteps. Shiloh and his subordinates recognized him. They put their weapons away and greeted him respectfully. "Thank you for saving our lives. You're the reason we were able to break out of prison." The man in a black robe had found them in the Blue River Mountains after the riots at the prison and given them special talismans that enhanced their combat abilities. It was evident that he was on opposing terms with the country, so he was worthy of their trust. "You're being overly cautious, but are you confident that you have what it takes to take down the Sovereign?" "It should be more than enough," Shiloh said. "Are you here to give us advice?" The man extinguished the bonfire with a flick of his wrist and motioned for them to follow him. Stephen and Nora were patrolling the mountain. They stopped beside a stream to take a break. I've been thinking about it all evening, but I can't figure out what our enemy is planning, Stephen muttered. Nor didn't know either. Both the Palace and the Leviathan unit's intelligence personnel couldn't find any useful information. We've built the defense towers to guard the towns. The only thing we can do is wait for them to show up. As the two of them whispered to each other, the man in a black robe led Shiloh and his subordinates to the stream. The talisman in his hands burned with a light blue flame. It had been infused with his inner energy and granted him the ability to hide his tracks to avoid detection. There they are. The two of them are alone. What's your plan? Shiloh wasn't expecting the man to lead them straight to the Sovereign for a direct confrontation. He felt like they were being too hasty. He didn't want to adjust his meticulous plan just because of the black-robed man's sudden appearance. The man noticed Shiloh's hesitation and didn't force him. His earlier assistance had already paved the way for their cooperation. There was no need for him to make things difficult for them. You don't have to fight them if you're not ready. I'm here to show you something interesting. Stand back and watch. Just as Stephen and Noor were about to turn around and leave, blue flames shot towards them from the darkness. They swiftly stepped to the side and avoided the attack. There was no explosion when the flames came into contact with the rocks by the stream. The rocks corroded instantly. Stephen was alarmed. If the flames touched them, they would be burned to a crisp. Not even their bones would be left behind. Who are you? Stop hiding and show yourself. Laughter echoed in the forest. I wouldn't hide from you. This is a rare opportunity to meet the Sovereign in person. It's a moonless night. Why not make it more enchanting with a little bloodshed? Noor stepped in front of Stephen when the man emerged from the shadows. This was the infamous man in a black robe they kept hearing about. He was powerful and mysterious. They couldn't let their guard down. You should be aware of your crimes. Will you surrender, or do you want to do this the hard way? The man was unmoved. I don't have time to talk nonsense. Come at me together. I doubt either of you will be able to lay a finger on me. Noor wasn't one to waste time on chit-chat either. Without warning, he sent a rush of wind across the clearing. A talisman appeared in front of the man and dissipated the wind. Noor unsheathed his dagger and closed the distance in an instant. He aimed for the man's throat. More talismans floated out from under the man's black robe. They formed a barrier against his dagger. Noor leaped back before lunging again at a faster speed, leaving behind dozens of afterimages. His onslaught was agile and hard to follow, but the talismans blocked every one of his attacks. The man hadn't taken a single step from where he stood, nor couldn't figure out how he was controlling the talismans. Stephen held out his hand, and his sword materialized in his palm. I'm assuming you're waiting for me to make my move. The Killen's core increased the temperature of his sword. With one swing, a wave of scorching aura swept the clearing. The surrounding plants and trees turned to ashes, and the man finally took a few steps back to dodge. Not bad. You live up to the rumors. The man stretched out his hands for the first time and fiddled with the talismans like they were cards. The color and pattern of every talisman was different. When Stephen rushed forward to attack the man directly, the talismans emitted a black mist and condensed into a scythe. Their weapons clashed with one another. Stephen leaped back. One collision with that scythe had sent a numbing sensation up his arm. Don't tell me you thought the talismans only had one ability. Underestimating your enemy is a grave mistake. In the time it took for the man to mock Stephen and Noor, a talisman had flown into the soil beneath their feet. Dark green vines emerged from the ground and wrapped around them. The speed at which they grew was astounding. Stephen and Noor cut down the vines with a few slashes of their weapons, littering the ground with ruined vegetation. Stephen didn't want to engage in a battle he had no confidence in winning. Noor, he has too many tricks up his sleeve. Let's retreat for now. The two of them whispered a few more words and disappeared in the opposite direction. The man didn't chase after them. To him, this was an interesting game, and dragging it out meant more entertainment. Shiloh and his subordinates walked out from the shadows of the forest. They admired the man's flashy techniques. They should be grateful you didn't give chase. They would have been killed if you caught up to them. Your flattery doesn't mean anything to me. The man held out his hand, and the talismans that were scattered across the clearing returned to his sleeve. When the talismans weren't in use, they stuck to the insides of his clothes like armor. If his opponent's weapon ever broke through his defenses, the talismans hidden in his clothes would serve as a convenient last line of defense. He hadn't been planning to fight the sovereign with his life on the line tonight. He would use the country's enemies and have them do the work for him. The sovereign's death would be a small interlude to his grand scheme. His ultimate goal was to destroy the country completely and put an end to their legacy. "What are you going to do next?" Shiloh asked. "Do you want to travel together? We could wait for Brent Robinson to take action before making our move." The man in the black robe glanced at him and then looked at his subordinates. He waved his hand, and a burning flame lit their chests on fire. They screamed in pain. Smoke emitted from the flames like their skin had been scalded by a smoldering iron. Shiloh grew nervous. "What are you doing?" "This is the price you'll have to pay for watching the show. Next time, if you're still too afraid of the consequences, I won't let you off the hook." The pattern of a rune was branded on his subordinates' chests. It appeared to be a charm. They weren't dead. They felt a strange power surge through them. Shiloh had more to say, but the man disappeared in a cloud of black mist and drifted into the night sky. After a long silence, one of his subordinates gathered his courage to speak. "What's wrong with him? Why didn't he kill the sovereign when he had the chance?" Shiloh dismissed his complaint. "Forget it. He won't stray too far from the battlefield. We'll continue with our original plan." Stephen and Noor went back to town without any further mishaps. They urgently summoned the Leviathan unit members to the local police station. Everyone had to be informed of the black-robed man's presence on the mountain. Talismans were similar to arrays. They could be considered a miniature version of an array inscribed on a special piece of paper. The holder could infuse their inner energy into different talismans to gain the upper hand in battle. Stephen had made an evaluation of the black-robed man after one encounter. He was a tricky opponent, but it wasn't to the point where Stephen would be killed. "Don't be discouraged. Leave him to me. You won't have a problem dealing with the others." "Why don't we announce to the public that Amber and Mitty live somewhere at the foot of the mountain to stop Warhawk from going overboard with whatever they're planning?" Jace suggested. "Right now, we don't have enough information to confirm the actual situation," Stephen replied. "It's our speculation that Warhawk is scheming behind the scenes. They might have allied with Vindictus and our neighboring countries, and if that's the case, they won't care about the lives of two scientists." Stephen instructed the Leviathan unit members to transport large amounts of firearms from the cities nearby to the foot of the mountain. If the wild beasts charged down the mountain towards the towns, the firepower they had on hand would be enough to stop their rampage. A few days later, a steady stream of vehicles drove into town. The Leviathan unit's leader and Trey, who had fully recovered, had personally escorted this particular batch of weapons and equipment. Trey pretended like he never ran away from Stephen's lecture the last time they met and reappeared in his office with a beaming smile. He was brimming with confidence, as if he was the strongest of the reinforcements there. "The Killin is incredible. I feel as good as new. I can follow you to the battlefield again." Stephen was exasperated by Trey's antics. "It's good to see you're as lively as ever." After exchanging greetings with the Leviathan unit's leader, he cut to the chase and gave them a rundown of the situation using the hologram in his office. The leader of the Leviathan unit's expression turned solemn. "I also have information I'd like to share. Let's begin with the Seven Stars prison. All arrays emit natural fluctuations of energy, allowing them to operate independently. It's not necessary for martial artists to constantly monitor the array to maintain its activity. The best way to deactivate an array is to find the location of its core. However, this is usually confidential information to prevent unexpected complications. The man in a black robe used the talisman to exploit the fluctuations in energy. He disrupted the frequency and resonated his own energy with the arrays and transported himself to the room containing the core. Everyone, including Stephen, was stunned by the profound mechanics of the man's talisman.
If he's mastered a technique that allows him to resonate his own energy with something else, doesn't that mean he can go anywhere he wants? Stephen asked.
That might not be the case, the leader said. I've already asked my people to set up countermeasures like defensive arrays, high-voltage electric towers, poisonous gas sprays, tracking lasers, and so on. The talisman has its limits, and I doubt he can go unnoticed with this setup in place. Martial arts techniques and modern technology were two completely different paths. The Leviathan unit's leader believed that his arrangements would be effective to a certain degree. The black-robed man's identity was still unknown, but it could be deduced that he was from an ancient martial arts group. The leader moved on to the next topic at hand. Our enemies are targeting us mainly because they have the country of Guran's support. If we negotiate with Guran and convince them to remain neutral, the severity of our crisis will lessen. Stephen didn't think negotiations were the answer. Warhawk had attempted this more than once, and they were sent back every time empty-handed. The leader could tell that Stephen didn't approve from the look on his face. Before you refuse, let me finish explaining. We can simply demonstrate what we're capable of by putting a knife to the king's throat. When faced with overwhelming disadvantage, he'll realize on his own that it's in his country's best interest to side with us. Stephen was surprised by the leader's radical suggestion. This required a skilled martial artist to sneak into Guran's imperial court and threaten the king with a knife to his throat to force him to make a choice. It was risky, but simple and effective method to get the job done. Stephen was all for it. The days passed, and in the blink of an eye, it was the night of the full moon. Brent and Odin decided that tonight would be their best chance to launch an attack. Many of the beasts were sensitive to the full moon. Brent instructed his people to lure the beast down the mountain and warned them to hide their tracks to avoid becoming the beast's targets. His team once again disappeared beyond the misty entrance of the canyon. Not long after, the cries of various beasts could be heard from within. The ground shook from the stampede of tens of thousands of wild beasts. They followed the scent of the shade grass and rushed down the mountain. No flower, tree, or boulder could stop them. They charged through every obstacle in their way. Brent and Odin grinned triumphantly at the spectacular scene. The Sovereign will have nightmares after tonight. The towns will be destroyed beyond repair. These beasts are as strong as the army pressuring the northern border. The hunters from Guran supported them. Good luck. If you succeed, the U.S. will be in your hands. Brent tossed the hunters several gold bars to express his gratitude. If it weren't for them, they wouldn't have found the canyon so easily. The gold bars were hard currency that was more valuable than checks. They were popular in every country. After sending the hunters away, Brent and Odin headed to the foot of the mountain. Brent felt uneasy. I don't know how effective the towers will be against the beasts. We didn't have a chance to test the beasts' defenses before the operation. It doesn't matter, Odin said. Our subordinates will be the ones doing the real work. The beasts are there for distraction and to wear down the Sovereign and his people's stamina. The impending nightmare of the horde of beasts became a reality. The stampede woke the entire town in the middle of the night. The heavy thuds on the pavement were followed by deafening gunfire. Stephen got out of bed and rushed to the towers outside of town. Within half a minute, the rest of his group was there with their weapons in hand. The shocking scene before them rendered them speechless. The beasts charged towards the town without caring about their lives. It was either they weren't afraid of death or didn't understand the concept of death. They allowed the bullets to pierce their bodies, blasting their flesh and turning them into bloody carcasses. Jace and Trey leaped into the fray from above. The Leviathan unit's members did the same. A storm of aura rained down on the horde. Its intensity was countless times stronger than that of firearms. Dr. Dalton walked over to Stephen and whispered, "The beast's eyes are red. I suspect they've lost control. Or perhaps their judgment's been clouded through some external means. Their only goal is to kill." Stephen observed the horde. Their eyes were red like Dr. Dalton had pointed out.
Is there any way to bring back their clarity?
No, we can only hope that our defenses are enough to stop them. Stephen didn't join the fight. His gaze was locked onto the forest behind the horde. This was a golden opportunity for their enemy to take advantage of the chaos. They were most likely hiding in the dark and observing the situation. Sure enough, he noticed someone sneaking around the forest. Stephen condensed his sword's aura into a fiery ball of light. He infused his inner energy with the aura, and it transformed into a flaming dragon that streaked across the sky and crashed into the forest. The explosion staggered the hordes of beasts. "How long do you plan to hide?" Stephen called out. "Come out and fight!" Brent's team of genetically modified martial artists and the members of Vindictus revealed themselves. "Tonight, you'll be forced to watch your own people being trampled. No matter how strong you are, you can't protect everyone." The horde of beasts couldn't break through the tower's firepower. They dispersed in every direction, aiming to find another way into town. The scent of the shade grass led them to the foot of the mountain, and the abrupt end to the trail triggered their mania and aggression, which was enhanced by the grass. They set their sights on the humans in town. "My people are more than enough to deal with the horde." Stephen leapt off the tower and lunged for his enemy. His sword's blazing aura became the most conspicuous existence in the air and drew most of the enemy's attacks onto him. When both sides collided, Stephen didn't falter, but his enemies were knocked backwards. A martial artist at the immortal realm wasn't to be trifled with. The Vindictus members felt like their bones were about to break from one blow. Stephen was much stronger than before. His progress was terrifying. Brent's team suffered internal injuries, but they made a full recovery within seconds. Their regenerative abilities piqued Odin's interest. He'd heard that Warhawk's technology was one of the best in the world. He was curious to see how Stephen would deal with them. As the battle dragged on, it became more difficult to determine the victor. The town's local police stations became a temporary command center. The directors communicated via video conference to update each other on the ongoing crisis outside their respective towns. As the discussion escalated, the directors began to raise their voices. "When is the Sovereign coming to provide backup? We can't hold on much longer. Find a way. The Sovereign's on the front lines, fighting an even stronger enemy. What are we supposed to do when firepower isn't effective? The beasts aren't killed even when they're hit directly." The towers provided a high level of defense, but the directors could see through the window that the situation was not looking good. The Leviathan unit members present had been stationed in every town, but the difference in strength between them and the Sovereign and his people was like the sky and earth. The directors were less than optimistic. With no other chance, they instructed the police officers to head out and console the restless civilians. If this continued, there was a high chance that the people would revolt and escape town through the gates. If the civilians ran around aimlessly on the outskirts of town, they would be handing their heads to the horde of beasts on a platter. There was no chance of survival. Nor moved quickly in the air, searching for an opening to kill Brent and Odin, but every time he headed in their direction, their subordinates got in his way. Stephen observed the genetically modified martial artists. Their regeneration was faster than he remembered. It seemed like Warhawk had made improvements to their biochemical technology, but they wouldn't last the night. Even with their regenerative abilities, the fact that they were ordinary martial artists would never change. Nor returned to Stephen's side to guard him. "Mr. Adams, you can't spend all your energy on their underlings. There are stronger enemies hiding in the forest." Stephen nodded. Besides Brent and Odin, he could sense the overflowing auras of other martial artists. Their strategy was to expend his stamina before making a move. Brent's team stopped for a moment to recover before charging again. The wounds they'd sustained from Stephen's sword were accompanied by raging flames, a special attribute of the Killen's core. The man in a black robe watched the battle from a distance with interest. He urged Shiloh and his subordinates to join the fight. This aligned with their plan, because their advantage in numbers was obvious. Shiloh and his subordinates rushed towards Stephen. He saw them coming and fended them off with a wave of aura. Shiloh smirked as he deflected the attack with his weapon. "Aren't you happy to see us again? We haven't seen each other since you locked us up in prison." "Stop with the nonsense. I take it you're ready to go back to prison now that you've revealed yourselves. Don't worry, I'll make sure you're behind bars again soon enough." "You still don't understand the situation you're in. Once the town's defenses are breached, your enemies are free to march in and invade the heart of the country." Shiloh's words were 30% truth and 70% lies. His goal was to decrease the Sovereign and his people's morale. Nor was preoccupied with Brent's team. They surrounded him and prevented him from assisting Stephen. Ever since I modified my weapon, I haven't had the chance to use its new abilities. You can be the first to test it out. The flames on Stephen's sword changed into a purple color as its temperature rose. The instant Shiloh and his subordinates' weapons clashed with Stephen's sword, they felt themselves being pulled into the flames. Shiloh hurriedly stepped back. He felt his strength rapidly decrease after exchanging one blow. Two of his subordinates couldn't react fast enough, and the purple flames traveled up their arms. Their screams lasted for 3 seconds before they turned into ashes. Long-range attacks were absorbed, and close-range attacks resulted in being burned to death. Shiloh didn't know which tactic he should use. He was forced to stare at Stephen's sword, searching for a flaw. Stephen noticed his gaze.
You've seen what Warhawk's biochemical technology can do, right? Why don't you ask them for help? At least then you wouldn't be killed so quickly by my flames.
Shiloh scoffed. Petty tricks from martial artists who can't reach a higher realm aren't worth mentioning. I don't need to use complicated methods to deal with you. As Shiloh spoke, he and the fugitives ranked second and third on the hit list surrounded Stephen and dashed around him in a circle. Instead of making a move, they were searching for a blind spot in Stephen's field of vision. Once they found an opening, they would launch a collective attack and kill him in one move. The battles in the air intensified, while the hordes of beasts on the ground were showing signs of a successful suppression. Trey was sweeping through the beast like it was a walk in the park. His new arm burned brightly with the killin's flames. As for the Leviathan unit's leader, he stood on top of the town's wall and peered into the distant forest. He was waiting for the man in a black robe to show up. An unexpected arrival was a significant variable that could turn the tide in a battle. Where exactly is he hiding? Is he just here to watch? Is he not going to reveal himself tonight? His subordinates standing beside him were optimistic. He might be holding back because he doesn't have any other tricks to use. Despite what his subordinates said, the leader didn't let his guard down. The battles in the air were becoming more intense. If this continued, the enemy would gain the upper hand. He unfurled a large scroll adorned with intricate patterns. It emitted energy fluctuations of various attributes. The man in a black robe could create talismans, but it wasn't an ability unique to him. The Leviathan unit's leader had achieved something similar. Instead of talismans, he used scrolls. They were heavier and larger, but they utilized a similar technique. The array on the scroll was complete, and all that was required to activate it was an incantation. When the leader leaped into the air with the glowing scroll, he attracted everyone's attention. Stephen pushed the fugitives back with a wave of purple flames and hurried to the leader's side. He inspected the scroll, but he couldn't figure out what it was for.
What is this? An antique painting? I sense a strong aura coming from it.
I'll explain after this is over. Brent frowned when he saw the Leviathan unit's leader join the battle. He didn't know what the scroll was, but someone in his position wouldn't take out something useless. With him here, this battle might not be in our favor, Odin said in a low voice. But there was no turning back when the arrow was drawn. Brent didn't want to return to Warhawk as a loser and be mocked by the higher-ups. We've already come this far. We can't turn back now. Brent issued another order to their subordinates. His team and the Vindictus members shifted their target to the Leviathan unit's leader and charged towards him. The leader formed a hand seal and chanted an incantation. A ray of light burst from the scroll and into the sky. A coffin with an intricate design emerged from the clouds. No one present had ever seen a coffin being used as a weapon. Before Brent and Odin's subordinates could decide what to do next, chains shot out from the coffin faster than the eye could see. By the time they raised their weapons to counter, the chains had already wrapped around their wrists and ankles. Their attempt to break the chains were in vain. The Leviathan unit's leader was satisfied with the outcome. It's rare to encounter someone as considerate as me. After you die, I'll give you a proper burial. It's better than dying in the wilderness and having your corpse eaten by wild beasts. The chains retracted, and those who were bound were swept into the coffin within seconds. In just one exchange, Brent and Odin had lost a large number of their people. Brent didn't hide his frustration. Why didn't you investigate the Leviathan unit's leader beforehand? How are we supposed to deal with something we know nothing about? Odin kept his cool and calmly analyzed the situation. Don't panic. We don't know what's in the coffin. Maybe our people will find a way to break out of it. It might be sturdy, but it's nothing more than a cage made of a solid material. It can't wipe out everyone inside. The man in a black robe was intrigued by the scroll. It seemed like the Leviathan unit's leader wasn't a complete fool. He'd grasped some understanding of the talismans and imitated the technique using a scroll. Unlike the talismans, the scroll was larger and contained more space for inscriptions to activate a stronger array. After giving the scroll an objective evaluation, the man threw several talismans into the air. They appeared in front of Shiloh and his subordinates. This was the end of the show. Whether they lived or died would be dependent on their individual choices. Having accomplished what he came here to do, he retreated into the depths of the forest. Shiloh and his subordinates grabbed the talismans. With these, their strength would increase significantly. It wouldn't be an easy escape, but at least they had a shot at killing their way out. Boss, are we going to fight Steven to the death? Most of Brent's people are down for the count. Shiloh examined the talisman in his hands. They still had a chance of winning. Let's wait and see. Avoid the chains for now. A giant coffin floating in the clouds rattled. The lid opened, and skeletons wielding weapons jumped out. Their flesh and blood had been corroded, leaving only their tattered clothes behind. From their uniforms, these skeletons belonged to the people who'd been dragged inside the coffin earlier. Head to the ground and wipe out the remaining beasts, the Leviathan unit's leader instructed. The skeletons nodded and leaped towards the ground. The number of enemies had increased, and it wouldn't be long until the tables were turned. Shiloh gathered his inner energy and released a torrent of water and lightning at the coffin. His attack was violent and powerful, and it seemed like it would cut through space and time. But when the torrent entered the coffin's range, the chains dispersed the raging storm into harmless droplets of water. The coffin wasn't damaged from the explosion. With no other choice, Shiloh and his subordinates ran off into the forest. The rest of the battle proceeded smoothly. The remaining genetically modified martial artists and the Vindictus members were wiped out. A handful of them managed to escape with heavy injuries. Brent and Odin no longer cared about their wasted effort and fled into the depths of the forest under the cover of night. When the battle concluded, Steven expressed his gratitude to the Leviathan unit's leader. Your scroll was mystical. I've never seen anything like it. We gained an advantage because of you. The leader gave him a smile. I couldn't have done it alone. We succeeded because of our combined efforts, but we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. Our true enemy is still out there somewhere. With the beasts on the loose, they didn't have time to chase the enemies who'd escaped into the forest. Steven led a team into town and wrapped up the battle. Broken walls, damaged gates, bloody carcasses, and panicked civilians. The once prosperous towns at the southwestern border were in ruins.